Welcome to the New Media Show, where each Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, UTC+4, Todd Cochran and Rob Greenlee take their over 30 combined years of leadership in the podcasting space to discuss, dissect, and deconstruct the current podcasting news, forecasts, trends, and predictions. Now here are your hosts, Academy of Podcasting Hall of Famers, Todd Cochran and Rob Greenlee.
Don't eat me, James Cridland.
He's not here.
Not yet. Anyway, it's like, okay, we're talking about James Cridland. He's
gonna join us,
but it's like 6 a.m. there for him, so he's gonna be a little weary-eyed.
6 o'clock. He should be, that's being
he
alive
should be lighting
and awake.
the fire.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, it's early bird catches the worm.
Yeah.
So anyway, he said he's calling, but no response. So is Skype up and going?
Well, there he is.
Here he comes. All right.
There I am.
Hey, there you are. And matter of fact, you missed it because we did this.
Don't eat me, James Cridland.
I've no idea where that's from, by the way. Absolutely no idea where that's from.
It was created by a
greetings
listener.
from tomorrow.
Yeah, right. It was just created by a listener to the show. So.
But anyway,
very good.
Welcome to the show, James. And of course, we kind of started the show kind of weird. Welcome to everybody to the New Media Show. So Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone.
Yeah.
So, of course, you're a day closer to Christmas, James, and you're absolutely, what would be really cool is if I flipped you upside down. And
yeah, I've never heard that one before.
Well, we're upside down to you too, so
Right, exactly.
Totally
fair.
Yes, that is the sun coming up this fine morning.
Yes.
So yeah, I'll tell you what Thursday is like for you guys still stuck on Wednesday.
and the sun is of course here in the East Coast in the winter, because it is winter for us and spring for you. The sun is about ready to set in about an hour. So,
yeah, indeed.
Anyway, thanks for getting up early and being with us. And I guess this isn't going to be our last show of the year. I guess we have one more, but I guess we're going to talk about podcasting. I think, right?
Maybe.
Hopefully.
I suppose, Todd, we could talk about new media and radio.
Yeah, we could talk about everything, but it's just, I was reading, of course, your newsletter came out this morning, and there was something I saw in there that I posted to my team, and I put in there, it was the article that you had linked to of talking about Lightning, about Bitcoin and feeds and
right.
So I just, I'm like, come on, guys, we need to get that enabled on our side so that, we can in PowerPress, but I need to get it for everybody because I think it's important. I don't think a lot of people understand it. You've written a pretty significant article on it.
I completely agree. Yes, I think that's the problem.
It's still early
for drinks. Stuff. I was out for drinks yesterday with somebody who listens to the Podnews podcast every day because it's a podcast as well as a newsletter, although the newsletter's better. And he was saying, you keep on talking about boostergrams and things like that, and I have no idea what they are. And I'm there thinking, we should probably explain that a little bit more every now and again. In radio, as Rob knows, there's this sort of whole theory about a reset. And you're supposed to reset things because you're always getting new listeners all the time.
Right.
And maybe we would do well to remember that in terms of podcasting as well when we're talking about these sorts of things.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. Actually, I was on a call earlier today talking about the convergence of radio and podcasting and how that works. And, that's one of those areas that's a little different, right? Because, on the radio side, you have linear experiences, right? People come in the middle of stuff. Right, there's not really a defined beginning and an end when it comes to linear radio. So you're always having to reintroduce things to keep new people up to date with what's going on, and that tends to create kind of a a short segment orientation to the medium, which is a little different than podcasting. So bringing those two worlds together, I mean, I'm sure you've done a lot of thinking about that. But as you think about all these radio companies getting involved in podcasting, I'm sure they're going to want to apply that to what they know best, and that's kind of the linear experience. And so, how do you see those worlds coming together right now? What's the state of the art?
I think we're seeing some really interesting things going on with Spotify buying Wooshka, which is a great podcast host out of Australia, out of Sydney. Right. But the secret sauce that it has is it has a tool which listens to radio broadcasts and cuts them up and makes them available as podcasts. And in many countries, those are the most listened to shows, particularly in those countries where podcasting maybe isn't quite as popular as it is in the US or the UK. So you can see that Spotify is very keen in pulling as much radio content into Spotify as they can, and obviously that's more content that they can slap ads next to, and so therefore that will be a good thing. And you can also see, iHeart owns its own podcast host in Omni Studio. SiriusXM owns its own podcast host in Simplecast. Global just bought Captivate, who I used to advise for, and Global is the UK is Europe's largest radio company. So you can very clearly see that there's, radio is sort of, coming in and going, okay, we see that all of this activity around podcasting, we need to have the entire stack, everything from the podcast hosting company to the ad sales service, obviously the talent as well, and blah, blah, blah. So you can see that, every single radio station is, every single radio broadcaster is busy building that sort of thing, yeah.
But it's kind of funny. We see lots of radio broadcasters that are supposedly under some mantra, yet they're using multiple service providers. So it's not like they're moving their hosting to whoever they're working with. It's just kind of funny because it's like, well, maybe it's going to take them a while to get their act together, but it's just like, we're going through our list and we're like, okay, are they going somewhere else and they haven't left in a year? So it's kind of bizarre to see that they buy these things, but I don't think they have a cohesive strategy.
Yeah, I think there may well not be a cohesive strategy yet. I mean, I find it fascinating that there are so many radio broadcast companies out there who are using Megaphone, who of course is owned by Spotify, their arch competition, or who is owned by another podcast host that happens to also be owned by one of their competition. I think if you're iHeart and you buy Omni Studio, then if you're one of iHeart's competition, you might raise an eyebrow if you're hosting on Omni Studio, and you might go, do I really want to be giving all of my stats and all of my details to my main competitor? I'm sure that there are, large walls in between what Omni Studio can see and what iHeart can see, and similarly what Simplecast can see and what SiriusXM can see. But the fact remains that one company is owned by the other. So you always have that sort of issue, I guess.
And one thing,
it's also a reflection of the stray cat mentality in the podcasting space. Everybody kind of likes to go off and do their own thing, and if they're under contract or under some sort of an agreement, or they like to be there, so sometimes these big radio companies don't actually own the content. They're just partnering with them. So yeah,
indeed.
And what we also see too is, matter of fact, a little bit of a confusion factor came up for me this week. One of my team members said, "Hey, this show is a top 10 show this year. We're coming out with a top 10 list," and I'm like, they don't. That particular show hosts somewhere else. And they're like, well, they've got a pro account, and I knew about the pro account, but what they were running was their premium content under our pro account. And so it was kind of funny. Their actual premium content made into our top 10 list, even though their public show it's hosted somewhere else. So, I'm sure that's going to raise a few eyebrows when we release that next week, but it's kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that top 10 list.
There's a few surprises in there. I knew about them, but I think other people will be. Maybe they won't be surprised, but anyway, It is a fun time this end of the year. I'm actually, I don't know, Rob, I don't know about you, but I've actually had a breather this week. I've actually been able to I had nothing on my schedule from 9:30 this morning until 3. And for me, that never happens. So it's like you get a good 5-hour run to get caught up on stuff and then have a leisure lunch and not have to dash back for a meeting. So
Yeah, I thought it was interesting the blog post that you had mentioned, James, in your newsletter, that was written by Dave Weiner.
oh,
He wrote an article about why podcasting isn't dominated by one large company, though I think that there's many in this space, especially as you think about the big media companies that think that they are dominating. But at the end of the day, it's not as easy to dominate this medium as I think a lot of larger companies think it is.
are they really thinking they're going to dominate?
I think they would like to, and I think there's a few brands out there that I think have given that impression that they already do, right? So
Well, we ran some year numbers, and at least on our side, I can tell you one that is not, at least with us.
right.
Our annual average, put that particular company, I think, at 6.7%. And you probably know who I'm talking about, where everyone else is up.
Is his company number one for podcasting by any chance?
No, that's not.
Well, there's a couple of them that are
they claim
claiming
that.
this.
iHeart claims that, and Spotify claims that. But I'll tell you that Spotify was not above 6.7%. I'll just say that much for the annual average, at least for us.
Well, it's sometimes confusing too, because some of the research is coming out saying that that Spotify has surpassed Apple, but that's sometimes we're comparing apples to oranges on those things too, because sometimes they're talking about the number of users, right? And it just so happens that those numbers of users aren't listening to as much content as what they're doing on Apple, but though there may be fewer people, right? So what's happening with Spotify, to be more specific, is that there may be more podcast users on Spotify, but they're not consuming as much as they are on Apple. And sometimes that gets lost in the translation.
And also if you look at our makeup, for really more than 5 years, we've been pushing heavily and having our own solution before Google came on the scene to subscribe to Android. So our Android adoption as a whole for our customer base is massive. It's really, really big. And no one else has those kinds of Android adoption numbers because they haven't had a strategy to help their podcasters get on Android. Not a good one, in my opinion. So we've got a long head start. We got at least a 5-year head start on everyone from our customer base. So when we come out with our list, people are going to say, how is that number possible? So there's going to be people are going to go,
What do you think will happen if and when Apple Podcasts launches an Apple Podcasts Android app? I've just lost a bet with Adam Curry that they were going to do that this year, but I'm convinced they're going to do that next year.
Well, I will say that I've had lunch a few times with people and have asked.
This is classic Todd. Yes,
and I have asked, are we going to see an Android app? And there's always a non-committal, I don't think so. Personally, just based on, I don't think, if they do, I'd be happy that they would, but I don't think they will.
Do you think that would turn into the number one podcast app on Android relatively quickly?
No.
Because it's a known brand and everybody's heard of it?
No, I don't think so, because why did Apple Podcasts and why did iOS, why was it so successful? It was one reason: single click, subscriber follow, single click, and it happened. Whereas, well, maybe 2 clicks, you get into the app, then you hit subscriber follow. But that's why we introduced subscribe on Android years ago, is that 1-click function to bring it up so that they could hit subscriber follow. It's all about the user experience and the podcasters. I did reports for years where a lot of podcasters still, even today, don't even talk about Android. Nothing. They don't say, they'll say Apple and Spotify.
Yeah.
I wonder how many times Apple Podcasts is searched for on the Google Play App Store. Because I bet it's a load. I bet it's a load of people who've gone, you know what? I keep on hearing that this podcast is on Apple Podcasts. How do I get Apple Podcasts on this Android phone? And I just wonder whether people out there, not you and I, but people out there fully grasp that, no, Google Podcasts or Stitcher, or you want Podcast Addict, or you want, Fountain, or whatever it might be. I'm really fascinated. I'm fascinated in seeing that, and also fascinated. I mean, you're talking about, Rob, you were talking about the Spotify. That there's research that comes out every single day about Spotify and showing that they are, increasing, and most popular platform for podcast listening is a new piece of data that I've seen. And again, most popular it probably is in terms of numbers. And this is data from Morgan Stanley. But what I found interesting is, and this is going to go into Podnews tomorrow. But what I found interesting is that the adding podcasts into it seems to have increased the brand's user satisfaction. So people are more satisfied with Spotify now that they've got, podcasts in there. And it seems to be, so Morgan Stanley seems to be helping Spotify grow as a music, app, because people are finding, additional content in there, which I just thought interesting. I'd not seen any correlation between what Spotify is doing in terms of podcasting and any increase in their music app, but Morgan Stanley appears to say that that's the case.
Well, it just gives the user more reasons to come into the app and look for content. I think is what happens. So it probably hasn't dramatically increased the amount of music that's listened to. I think what I've seen in the research over the years, and it's kind of evolved, is that what it creates is just more consumption across the board.
But
it doesn't really spike one or the other.
But it sure doesn't equate in actual data. That's the thing that I tried to get back to.
An actual consumption.
Actual consumption, yeah.
Right.
Now
It equates to the actual data. I mean, if you talk to Podtrack, for example, who can work out, unique users as well as total downloads.
We do that as well.
Then there's a big difference. There's a big difference there as well. It'd be interesting to see whether you have that data. Yeah,
I have that same data. I've had that data for years. It doesn't agree. It doesn't match. It doesn't show.
Okay.
Because it doesn't. And again, I think each platform and who they're measuring and who they're. So, Rob and I've talked about this before.
Yeah.
I know who our user personas are. I'm not going to talk about it on the show because I spent a lot of money figuring that out.
Yes.
So I know who my user personas are, and I know that my user personas are not necessarily content that is going to be super popular on Spotify.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you have content that more fits into a Spotify user base, their user persona, whether it be true crime, whether it be sports, whether it be entertainment shows, I don't think you're finding people listening to a lot of business shows, a lot of tech. I don't think
this show.
This show.
Definitely not listening to my show.
Right. I think maybe we have one or two that listen to this show on Spotify, but it's very, very small. So I think also the makeup of the shows, and at the same time, they've got some big name shows. So of course, people are listening to a lot of Rogan. A lot of people are listening to those top shows that they bought. So that equals to a lot of listens for those shows. But for the average podcaster, I don't think it amounts to much.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Do you have any sense of how many people on either of your platforms, how many people are listed on Apple Podcasts? Because Buzzsprout once gave me a stat saying 60% of their shows, only 60% of their shows were on Apple Podcasts, because it was just the things that you need to go through to register an Apple ID and blah blah blah. It was just too complicated for quite a lot of people. Did you have any sense, either of you, on how many of your shows are on Apple Podcasts? I'm guessing most of them, but
it's similar. I mean, I think and this also accounts for, I talked to Adam Curry here recently about his difference between his 4.5 million and what Apple is reporting at the 2.5 million shows. And the discrepancy is a lot of shows don't submit to Apple, or they don't submit to Spotify. So sometimes, things, I think as we've attracted a lot of new podcasters to the medium, they haven't always been, keen and doing a terrific job of getting into all of the platforms. I think Anchor, just to give an example, was doing that automatically for a lot of people, but now they've dropped that, right? So now there's going to be a big discrepancy between shows that are published on Anchor that are available on Apple, right? Because that's not happening automatically, right?
Well, I because the way our onboarding process works and the way we try to get people up and running, that's the goal. Get them to episode 1, get them out, get them published. I would say, and I don't have an exact number, we could probably run that pretty quickly, but I would say in the high 90s of the shows that are hosted with us are on Apple Podcasts. It just reflects in the total numbers. I think we're at 56. I'm going to get the number wrong. I think it was 50.
It's much lower on Spotify.
I think it was 56.7. Again, for an annual percentage, again, it doesn't talk about, well, here's what I did. I took the database number, the 3 billion or whatever it was total downloads, and I ran the query to look at, okay, what was the percentage that came from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Cast, basically the list.
Yeah.
And again, it was, Apple was about 50, I think around 56%. So, but again, there, it's a little, some of that stuff is a little fuzzy, even, depends on
completely. And there's the whole Apple Core Media stuff, which is so frustrating.
It is.
There's one thing that Apple could do there to completely fix that. So
they're listening, by the way,
just to help people. They listen to everything I do, which is a concern. So if you are in inverted commas streaming, if you're using a progressive download, then your Apple iPhone will almost always just say Apple Core Media as the user agent. As you know, and one thing that Apple could really do to really help the podcast industry is to it's their own SDK, is just to let you set a user agent for that SDK. It would be really helpful, but it's clearly nothing to do with the Apple Podcasts team. It's to do with the Apple, iPhone team. But it would be so helpful if they were able to end up doing that, because I think that's where a lot of the discrepancy in these numbers is. I see, somewhere in the region of 20% of all of my downloads are to Apple Core Media. And you can't instantly say, well, that's Apple Podcasts, because it isn't. And there are some podcast hosts that pile everything into the Apple Podcasts number if they see Apple Core Media, which is wrong. There are some that take it all away, which is also wrong. And you have to do an awful lot of playing around, as I've done on my own show, but there again, my own show only gets 2,500 downloads, so I don't have a worry about how much I spin up my servers and everything else. But actually being able to pull out the real numbers and do some sort of fiddling around with RSS user agents and everything else is really interesting. But it's something that not an awful lot of large podcast hosts are doing. So you end up with these wildly different numbers of what Apple's figures are, and so therefore what the entire market actually is. This sun is beautiful, is it not?
Yeah, if you keep your head just that way a little bit, keep the sun to the back, you get the sunburn back there.
This is making for great radio.
It's creating quite a godlike halo around.
Yeah, that's right.
James.
But overall, in the end, we all get wrapped around this information, and what do podcasters still want? They want to grow. They don't, they don't care where they listen. They want to grow,
Yeah.
And some people get down in the weeds. Eileen says in the chat, she says, people that are new to podcasts, young and old, don't care so much about Apple as veteran podcasters do. We don't care. As a veteran podcaster, I don't care about Apple. but we wouldn't be here without them. So I think that we don't care where new people listen. I really, really don't. But every time I get someone that isn't if they are subscribed to a podcast, almost invariably they'll say, what's your podcast? And I'll say, well, open up your phone and I'll get it for you. And 9 out of 10 times they open Apple Podcasts on their Android device or on their Apple device. And I just find it and follow them right there and take a quick peek at what they're already following. But every once in a while, I'll find somebody using Overcast or Pocket Cast or some of those types of apps. And then again, sometimes people aren't watching anything at all or listening to anything at all. So, I don't know. I'm not going to get too worried about it, but Spotify is not going to own the podcasting space. Going back to Dave Weiner's article.
To go back to what you were talking about, James, about whether Apple's going to do something on Android. I think Todd and I've been talking about that for a long time now, especially when you think about the concept of Apple very early put iTunes on Windows. It's kind of a similar type of a situation where Apple saw scale and they saw an opportunity to scale to a much larger platform, and that would be Android, right? But Apple hasn't updated iTunes either on Windows. So it could be that Apple's in this era now where they just only want to work primarily with their own platform, though they have branched out and added, I guess, Apple Music to Android, right?
Yeah. So basically,
it's possible.
Anything that earns Apple money appears to be on the Android platform as well. So iTunes is no longer earning any
premium
money.
Content now, so maybe there is a play there.
Exactly. So this is my thinking. That was my thinking earlier on in the year about whether Apple Podcasts would add, because there was no reason for them to do that before.
Oh, so it's a good point.
Now that you can follow a podcast and you can subscribe to a podcast, you can spend money on a podcast with Apple, and Apple gets their 30%. Then there's a real opportunity for them to, instead of just getting that 30% of revenue from the 50% of people who are using iPhones, to get them from everybody. Right. And you look at what's available on Android now, and there's Apple Music, which is additional revenue for them. There's Apple TV Plus, which is also available on Android and Android TV. Which is additional revenue for them. And there are a few other things like Find My Device and those sorts of things, which are, of course, tying back to the Apple hardware, which is revenue for them, which is also available on Android. So you can kind of see that if Apple Podcasts is making money, which it must be to a degree in terms of their paid subscriptions, then wouldn't it be useful for them to essentially double the amount of people, who are there? And I think it's interesting when you look at there was some announcements from a few podcasters a couple of weeks ago that they were not just using Apple Podcasts paid subscriptions, but they were also branching out and being available on all of the other platforms through supporting Cast. This was Slate and Pushkin. And both of them were saying at the time, we are doing this so that people on other platforms can, enjoy our shows and pay for our shows as well. So I'm sure that it would please the publishers as well, were Apple Podcasts to be available on an Android device. So I've already lost 100,000 sats, which is about $60 to Adam Curry, like he needs it, and I have renewed that bet for another year. So I'm probably going to lose another 100,000 sats, but still, there you go.
That's funny. Yeah, I think your hypothesis, if I said that correctly, is correct.
That's a good word.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I think it makes sense that they would consider that. But the question then really is, you think about development resources. I know what it costs to build an app, and it costs Apple money too. So let's say it's probably a quarter of a
skint Apple with none of the money. Yeah, I think if there's one company in the world that can afford it.
Yeah, I know. But there's some bean counter somewhere that's saying, okay, it's $250,000 to put an Android app together.
Yeah.
And okay, how long is it going to take to pay that back? And, so maintain it. And, and in the end, they're going to go, okay, does the math make sense? And some bean counter has to sign off on that transaction.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll
see what Tim Apple has to say.
or Apple just does it to put a dig on Google. Now, with Google fooling around and can't figure out what they're doing. Well, I think we know what they're doing, but we'll see. There's an opportunity here.
Well, and as there's this discrepancy between shows that are available in Apple and ones that are available in the podcasting space grows, I think it's also going to put pressure on Apple to embrace a better submissions process as well.
Yeah.
Because that's been one of the things that has held back the development of their catalog was having to log into an Apple ID and manually submitting, where their competitors like Spotify have done distribution deals, like with Todd and I, to create a one-click submission process to get content into their platform. And you can see how that
should be really easy. They should get some form of API, and of course, Anchor was using those some sort of weird API that they'd built for themselves to auto submit. Something, by the way, that Anchor and Apple both deny, which I have to always say, because apparently they had no special arrangement. So you can really see. I don't know if you've seen the stats of new shows that Daniel J. Lewis puts together.
Yeah.
And you can see that really slowing down after June of this year, when Anchor stopped, auto, sticking things into Apple automatically. Yeah, and it's a real large slowdown. And as you say, Todd, good, because it actually stops flooding the Apple Podcasts directory with nonsense, with one show called Test,
and the person going test.
Yeah,
test.
exactly. But of course, that would never have gone in because Apple have never given them a free ride. So that's okay. So I'm delighted that Anchor aren't doing that anymore. I'm delighted that those shows that you see in the Apple Podcasts directory have been purposefully put there. But I would agree with you, Rob. I think the sooner that Apple can have some form of API, or even just OAuth into it, so that you still have to fiddle around with an Apple ID, but at least you don't have to copy and paste RSS feeds all over the place, because that's right. Not easy for somebody who's brand new on this.
Right.
That would be really, really helpful. But there's a ton of things that could be done that could be really, really helpful, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think we're past the era of podcasters having to cut and paste RSS feeds around. I think,
and I think they,
yes, I hope so.
Just I guess I can say this: they're aware,
of course they are, right.
Of this want, and
I've been asking them for like the last 15 years.
I know, but I think they're. If I was to make a prediction, I would predict we would see that the next year. If I was to make a prediction,
right?
Potentially, we would see that the next year. But I
think they need to do it from a competitive standpoint,
right?
Todd.
And I also hope that they have some criteria that goes along with it. So maybe you have to have published 2 episodes or 3 to do the auto API submission. I don't know. Maybe I'm talking out of my.
Well, I think that's what the iHeart folks did early on too, and they wound up backing off on that.
That's true. Well, their number was bigger.
Well, it was 5 episodes.
Right.
Yeah.
And a certain amount of time too. But we found it's just like when I was really heavily running tech podcasts. Same thing. I made shows have at least a minimum of 7 episodes. And we looked at the time spacing on them. And even then, when we approved shows, more than 50% of them failed before they hit 20. So it still ended up me having to go in and clean up, dead shows on that platform.
Yeah, but Todd, putting a limit like that on there doesn't help a show get to 5 episodes. So that's the problem.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they may shut it down because they don't get enough action.
Enough action. Yep.
Right.
And when you have people now that don't know how to right click a mouse, literally, Yeah, that one click, left click subscribe or left click submit would be wonderful.
So I wanted to throw it to both of you guys. Do you guys see any future for the impacts of artificial intelligence on podcasting? Because it seems like the podcasting industry does kind of play a little bit behind on technology innovation. But do you guys see anything bubbling? James, have you heard anything about artificial intelligence kind of coming into podcasting?
I mean, I guess it depends what bit
where
of
and what,
podcasting.
right?
Yeah. So I linked a couple of weeks ago to a really interesting podcast that was built entirely from AI. So the music behind was AI. It was a sort of a nonsense story designed, frankly, to put you to sleep. And that was written by AI. And then even the show art was done by AI. And very, very clever. But of course, it's just a piece of audio art, if you like. It's not necessarily a podcast, but a very clever thing. But I think we're seeing I think that artificial intelligence is one of those phrases which is bandied around and means different things to different people. But I think we are seeing some very clever use of AI or algorithms or whatever in terms of getting rid of noise, noise reduction, or getting rid of swapping between cameras. Riverside, for example, when you use that service, it's got this thing where it will make a video file for you of your interview, and they call it artificial intelligence. I'm not sure it is, but it knows, because it's looking at the audio, it knows when to switch a camera, and can switch a camera early, because it can look ahead in the audio and go, okay, Todd is about to speak, we'll turn his camera on. And so all of that stuff, and you can call that artificial intelligence, because frankly, it is pretty clever. But yeah, so there's a bunch of that kind of stuff going on. Where were you sort of thinking, Rob, in terms of your sort of definition of artificial intelligence there?
Yeah, I think that there's probably two major areas that can be used. I think where it's going to get used most effectively, the soonest, is in trying to find context inside audio. So as you think about the convergence of transcripts with the ability of the computer to listen to the audio and analyze the audio, and then be able to make certain decisions about the audio, or to create context, right? To be able to maybe create certain clips that have context to it, maybe find locations to be able to do dynamic ad insertion that is based on the context and the audio patterns, right? So I think that's more kind of a back end kind of thing. I think on the creation, on the creation side, it's a different thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can well see that podcast transcripts might be really handy in knowing, well, this podcast is talking about registering a domain name. We'll put an ad in there for GoDaddy. You can see that would be a really useful, clever piece of tools. And maybe it's one of the reasons why you see a bit of a scramble at the moment from podcast hosts busy working out how they can support transcripts better. Quite apart from obviously the fact that one company is getting sued for not making them, but you can see that there's real opportunities in terms of just ad revenue as well there.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously addressing
you think transcripts is going to help
stuff.
You think transcripts is going to help ad revenue?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you know what a show is about, in terms of the programmatic, in terms of the bucket stuff at the bottom, but if you know what a show is about, if you know what a show is talking about, then you can well see that might be another useful signal. I find it weird, and obviously the ads that I get are very different to the ads that you guys get, but I find it very weird when I'm listening to a very gritty true crime dramas and everything else, and then all of a sudden up pops an ad for Pizza Hut or something, and you're there thinking, really, is this really program compatible? I don't know. So anything I think that helps with that and makes the advertising better is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it can get a little creepy on the other end of the spectrum too, where let's say you're in a true crime podcast and they're talking about gun violence or something like that, and then there's an ad for, a gun or something. I don't know. So that contextual relevancy can be used as another form of targeting, right? And I think that's what some people are starting to think about this as we kind of more and more kind of get limited in our ability to do specific user targeting. It becomes more contextual to the content, and I think there's I think it's still a little bit up in the air how effective that actually is in reality.
I've been running programmatic on Geek News Central now for about 2.5 months.
Oh yeah.
And it's a test, some things we're doing. And I'll be honest with you, the ads have not been bad because I've got about 10 people that are reporting in across the country. Mm-hmm. What did you get? What ad did you hear? And I left the filter open. I didn't turn off any category of ads. And so far, they've been, at least in my short amount of reporting that's come back, is they've been pretty good. They've been either regionally aligned or they fit. I haven't got any weird thing. At least it's been reported back to me. No one sent me an email, and my listeners are pretty vocal. If they hear something they don't like, they're gonna put me on blast. So I think it really depends on the system that you're integrating with too, on how good it is to know where your show lays in the stack, the category, and I think it also goes into the indexing on the platform that's doing the programmatic.
Yeah.
Because they can say, and you can also say within programmatic, I don't want sex, I don't want politics, I don't want, 3, 4, 5, whatever categories, broad categories you don't want. But again, programmatic right now is CPMs aren't that bad.
Right.
Believe it or not, they are not that bad in the full scheme of things.
Yeah, I think I think there's still a pretty good size range in that, Todd, right now. But I have heard of CPMs up as high as 18.
Demand is super high, and there's not enough inventory right now. That's the problem. Yeah. There's not enough inventory.
Right, and they're clamoring to get more inventory out there. Right.
And I think it leads to some of the stuff that James has been reporting on about, CPM rates, and these, got to have $1 million of, advertise on Joe Rogan, and $500,000 here, and 300,000 there. That's stupid money. Well, it's not stupid money. It's fantastic if they can get it. But I think back to when we were doing deals at $250,000 a quarter, and they weren't worried then about too much of the same ad going into the same show. That wasn't a problem, even in the early days. And they're all worried now about, if you hear it in 3 different weeks, that's too many of the same ad to hear. Well, I don't agree. This isn't radio. This is podcasting. Radio. Radio hear it 3 times in 1 hour.
Right. I mean, those advertisers are still concerned about brand safety. With the programmatic stuff too. But if you look at what's happening on average around the CPMs for host reads, it's in the $23-24 and up, depending on the deal. But so that's not that much of a delta if we're at the high end at 18, 19 on the programmatic side, and the host reads are at 23, 24. You can kind of see how those worlds are colliding.
Well, I don't think programmatic is in 18's normal. 12, 13 high.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
7 to 10
Todd, I agree with
normal.
You. That's at the upper end of the
right. 18 is. I mean, I'll take 18 every single day of the week.
Yeah, but that's huge increase from what it was just like 3 years ago.
Because it's all about demand. They don't have enough inventory to fill.
Right.
So AdvertiseCast, which is part of Libsyn, published their
Right.
CPM rate and on a monthly basis, and it is fascinating seeing how that works, and fascinating seeing the big dip in the middle of last year as we had no idea what was going on with COVID and everything else, and now they're reporting for November that the average was $23.26 for a 60-second ad spot, which may or may not be a little bit too long, but it's interesting seeing those numbers. And I think what would be brilliant is for more companies like that to share some of the information, because the more data that we have, the more information that we can actually compare ourselves with, then the more useful it'll be. So I think that they're doing some really good good ideas there. So yeah.
In the end, and I think we're at this point, 5 years ago, podcasters weren't willing to give up control
Right.
to do programmatic.
Right.
Now we're in a different space. I think podcasters are finally at the point where they're more open to allowing an unknown ad go as a pre-roll on their show, as long as they can say which categories to exclude.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean,
I think we're there.
I agree with you, but I do think that we still have to do an ever increasing better job of helping those podcasters understand who the advertisers are as much as we can. I know that's something I think
there's
about
also
a lot.
a good mix. There's a good
Right.
mix out there of ad revenue, but also what Adam Curry talks about, the whole value for value. And value for value needn't be cryptocurrency and everything else. Value for value could be just asking somebody, please support me. Please, if you really like this podcast,
Right.
Come to Patreon, send us a tip on PayPal, whatever it might be. And I think what is interesting now is that we're seeing more and more different ways of earning revenue, from the programmatic ads to the sponsors, to those sorts of tip stuff, to paid subscriptions and everything else. And I suspect that as we see more and more of those different routes happening, that there's a phrase that means something completely different in Australia, then I'm sure that we'll see just sort of different ways into great creative content that doesn't necessarily have to be promoted by advertising, and by somebody shouting at you for 30 seconds about insurance in the shape of a lizard. We can probably do other things there as well. Although there's nothing wrong with insurance from lizards.
That's right.
Right.
I think, though, part of the challenge still remains that, as an example, and just use my personal show. Obviously, I've had a sponsor the entire time. The audience knows I've had a sponsor for that show. So they know that any money they give me, and I designate where that money goes in those donations. I say it goes to my writers, goes to the production of the show, goes everything for the upkeep of the podcast. None of it comes to me directly. Ultimately, I get to keep more of my regular sponsorship money for me, but the donations go towards the production of the site and the show. And I've always wondered what would happen. I don't want this to happen, but I wondered what would happen if that company right there decided that they weren't going to sponsor the show anymore. If that happens, then what will the audience do? Will the audience say, okay, he doesn't have and for those of you listening, I pointed at the sign on my desk. So I didn't want to.
Which says GoDaddy.com, by the way.
Okay.
Let's not mess around here.
So if they decide that they're not going to sponsor the show anymore, I've always wondered what would happen. I say, okay, hey, I'm on my own now. Now we need to take it to a whole nother level. Would they jump in? That's where, and I think that's what happens with a lot of shows that are monetized. They don't really want to risk that monetization for a user-supported model. But if you're not on a sponsorship already, there's no risk in asking for donations. So, and if you can build that base up, that's fantastic, because then they become super fans of the show and are promoting it, and because they have a vested interest to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's important, but I think, there's a whole, I think that's what's quite exciting around podcasting now is that the ways that you can monetize a show, if you want to do that, and let's remember, not 90% of people don't, or 90% of people want to, just big themselves up as being an influencer, as et cetera, et cetera. But those people who do want to monetize their show, they can absolutely do that with, with a variety of different methods, and that makes a bunch of sense. And if you've got a long-term sponsor, then that makes absolute sense. If you're looking for a domain name, geeknewscentral.com. Is the place to go. So
That's
yeah,
right.
I think that makes a bunch of sense. But I think that's just self-sustaining creativity was the way that some people have called it, and I really like that as a phrase because actually everybody can be really creative and do some great stuff, but at the end of the day, it needs to be sustainable in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm curious about the sustainability of advertising as a method of monetization over time too. I mean, is there something new coming? This whole cryptocurrency thing. Is there, like you're just saying, James? There's a lot of other models, and I do think, just to add to this discussion, that there are a lot of podcasters out there that would like to make money from advertising, but they currently can't because either their show isn't big enough or they don't know how to get it done, how to position their show to be good for advertising. So there's still this curve that we're still climbing to get there. And I know when Todd and I first started in this medium, there were a lot of shows that were getting ad buys, but now the industry is kind of consolidated and only buying big shows. And so what I'm seeing is the programmatic is an opportunity to get back into buying across larger numbers of shows again.
I think it's a scale thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's hopeful
making it easier for the advertisers.
Right.
I was part of the team that sold podcast advertising in February of 2004, which was quite a push. Yeah. Sorry, February of 2005. February of 2005.
Podcast
which was quite a push to the UK government, by the way, I should
Wow.
say.
Wow, yeah. That's great.
So, so there's a thing.
And again, 50% of podcasters don't care about making any money.
Exactly.
So that's another piece to this too.
Exactly. And I tell you one thing about that. It's something that I've noticed with the whole value for value thing and the whole sort of, boostergrams, where you get to send a message through your app with a little tip. That is really surprising when you turn that on. And we should get that turned on this show, because once you turn it on, then you get all of these messages from people who are listening to your show. They're accompanied with money, which is a good thing. But also, secondly, it means that you always get positive messages. When I used to be on the radio a long, long time ago, then, thankfully, text messaging hadn't been invented, but emails certainly had. You would get these, grumpy emails whenever you'd play a song that people didn't like or whatever it was. And I'm sure that, Rob, you had the same sort of thing as well. Whereas the beauty about something like a boostergram is that you are sending money, you are sending a tip, therefore it's always likely to be a positive message. And if it isn't a positive message, well, more fool them, because they've sent me some money alongside with their insult, so I think even just little things like that really change a podcaster's view from I'm broadcasting this thing, I'm sticking it on a podcast, no one is listening, I'm just seeing a couple of numbers coming out of my podcast host, to turning around and going, I know I've got people listening, they're sending me messages, I'm getting feedback. And that's a tremendous step, I think, against things like pod fading and against people losing interest, because they can see that there are real people out there rather than just a random number in their podcast host's dashboard.
I think, too, is I always said any email was good email because I knew they were listening, either they were pissed off or not. So I had this one guy out of Brooklyn, name was Sal. As a matter of fact, I kind of miss him. He finally got sick of listening to the show and left. But, Sal would send me these, these very warm emails that I would read on the show, of course.
Long emails, Todd? I mean, some of these people would write like
they would
paragraphs and
be,
paragraphs.
there would be, like an opinion on my opinion on something. And of course it was differing, which was fine. And, but I always loved getting those because it caused lots of conversation, right? But you're right. And it was exciting to get those emails because I knew people are engaged. And, to James's credit here, when it's all hate, then it kind of sucks. But, if you have a good intermix of people supporting you, it's good too. So with Lightning and with, getting sats, people are like, what's Lightning? What's sats? Then, it does. It
just sort of a positive, just enabling a positive feedback loop. And I think that's and it's something that it enables within a bunch of different apps. And the trick is to read them out, as you said, Todd. The trick is to read them out, because if you read out emails that you've got from your audience or whatever it is, then other people think, oh, I can email this show and I can, and they'll actually read it, and so it turns into a flywheel of feedback,
right?
Yes.
So it is a it's a double-edged sword, because if you don't get email and you don't get comments and you implement all this stuff, and all of a sudden you've done this implementation and it's still equaling 0, that can be a bit discouraging as well.
Right.
Yes.
So,
yes. Well, if you don't have any listeners to your podcast, it's possibly a time for you to reel back and go, I wonder why this is the case.
And I have this conversation a lot with content creators. I look at their numbers; they're doing great. Let's say they have 1,000 downloads or plays an episode, and they think they're doing bad. And you're talking them through what you're seeing and growth rate and everything else, and then I'm asking, like, how many emails are you getting per episode? Are you getting? They're like, well, I get no emails. I said, well, do you even tell them you can email you? Well, no. So sometimes it's just telling the content creator, hey, you got to tell the audience to email you. If you want feedback, you got to give them an easy way, email, text, whatever way you want to do it.
It's called being open. I mean, you can't hide. I think a lot of podcasters, Todd, I'm sure you've seen it as much as I have too, is there's a lot of podcasters that just kind of hide. There's no way to get a hold of them.
There's no contact link on their page. There's nothing. There is, and it's like, okay, so what do? Do I go to the Who Is database and try to find them that way? Or, it's, and which you can't do anymore. But
and a lot of people feel uncomfortable putting their email addresses out because they feel like they're going to get spammed or something like that. And there's a way to do it out there without.
Well, Gmail has millions of emails being created every day that are spammers are using. So just create one for your show. Be sure to check it every day, though.
Right.
It's interesting though. I've not. You're making me think that those websites that podcast hosts, automatically give you, none of those, as far as I can think of, actually has a contact us section. Actually has a form there. Maybe I'm missing some, but I mean, that might be an opportunity, mightn't it, for a bright podcast host to move forward. I'm no longer an advisor for one, so maybe I should become an advisor for one. Who knows? That might be a thing, because obviously, if you're a podcast host, one of the things that you really want is for your podcasters to keep podcasting, and give them as many tools as you possibly can. Because if they stop podcasting, that's revenue that you're not going to get back.
That's exactly right.
So it strikes me that there's an opportunity there in as a simple feedback mechanism that at least could actually exist there, and could have some rudimentary spam filters and stuff on it as well, and away you go.
Well, I'll just say that
Have that idea for free, Tom.
that every Blueberry podcaster who gets a free WordPress site automatically has a comment section turned on in their website. So
well, there you go.
There you
Yes.
go.
Excellent.
As long as they put in an active email address in there. It's the same with Libsyn too.
Yeah, well, they have to go if they
right.
don't put an active email. Well, there is
Nothing works if you don't put an active email.
We put an active
Yeah, exactly.
We put the account email address in there, but it's still in the comment section. There's still comments in the actual blog interface. They can read the comments. But
and
contact
pages.
pages.
I think, you know, again, one of the things I'm interested in with that Adam Curry is doing and Dave Jones is building cross-app comments as well. So if I leave a comment in one particular app, then I can still see that comment in other apps. So it's kind of, you know, I talk a lot about the empty pub. Nobody feels comfortable walking into an empty pub.
Right.
An empty bar, because it's just like, you know, it's just you and the person behind the bar, and it's just embarrassing, or at least it certainly is for me. Whereas if there are other people in there, you feel much less embarrassed about being in there and much more likely to join in a conversation. So I really like the idea of cross-app comments to basically pull all of those comments from all of the different places where you can leave comments now. So that you know, so that you're actually joining, you know, more of those people together. You know, I think that's really interesting.
There's two problems that are it's going to happen with this. Number one, the spammers are going to exploit this in a big way. They're going to come after it hard. Number two is, and again, don't get me wrong, I love these ideas, love these concepts, love these implementation. How, you know, what do we? I still say we have to incentivize. We have to incentivize the app developers to do this. So let's say Overcast gets some sats.
Yeah, Overcast is a really bad example, but yes, I know exactly what you mean.
Okay.
And actually, I mean, you know, the way that the tipping stuff is actually built is that I think 5% automatically goes to the podcast app. So there is some incentive there, but that's not so helpful in terms of cross-app comments and all of the other fancy
it builds
things.
into everything.
But I do completely agree.
It builds into everything, because if your app is not a subscription model, it's a one and done. The person pays for it and they're done. They never get no more revenue from that. So you know, what do we do to incentivize the app developers to implement this? So
Well, you know, when I sent my 100,000 sats over to Adam Curry for the bet, I sent it through Fountain, and Fountain takes a 5% fee of all of the payments, and so therefore, you know, the good folks at Fountain, Oscar Merry, ended up with 5,000 sats for essentially building the website building the app that helped me send that thing through. So, you know, I think that's a perfect, you know, example of you know, he is now whatever 5,000 sats is. It's not an awful lot. It's about $3 or $4, but nevertheless, at least it's something. And if you multiply those up, when this thing gets into the mainstream, then, you know, you are potentially talking about quite a lot of money.
Yeah. Again, I'm sure we're saying a lot of things. People are like, "What? What is that? What do you mean?"
And the answer is, of course, go to podnews.net and just search for whatever it is that you don't know.
That's right.
And hopefully you should find it.
Got the solution for you. Yes, I wanted to change gears a little bit. Maybe we can talk about, you know, Todd and I, you know, came up in this medium early, and I'm sure, James, you saw it because you're involved in the medium very early as well. But video, I'm just want to throw out video as we see the new year. I think there's a lot of talk about YouTube, and it's not so much that conversation, I don't think, is in 100% about video in relation to YouTube, but I do kind of wonder about the growing interest of video in the context of podcasting, and what you guys think is, you know, 2022 going to look like with video integrating more in the experiences of podcasting, especially on the listener side, and what podcasters need to do to embrace that growing perception that podcasting is video too.
It has been for a long time, since the beginning.
I I agree, Todd, but we did go through a spell when video kind of fell off the radar.
Yeah, where I was pretty much one of the few lone wolves that were actually put. Here's the difference, though. There is video, like we're doing live streaming now.
Right.
And there is YouTube videos, which we're actually doing a YouTube video right now. But
Right.
putting an actual video as a podcast is a whole different. I don't think that's going to change. I think very few people will actually be attaching video to an RSS feed. I just don't think that's going to change. I do think that a lot more people are going to live stream. And why did I start live streaming? It's very simple. I was in Hawaii. It was 8 p.m. Hawaiian when I did my show. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast. Matter of fact, James could have watched my show in Australia. I had more people watching my show live from Australia than I did from the United States because of the time difference. I did it because I was tired of doing a solo show by myself, and I wanted just a little
feedback.
Feedback.
Yeah. Comes back to what we were saying earlier about comments and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think there's two things in terms of video. I think one thing, there's some really interesting data that came out from the Canadian Podcast Listener 2021 report that came out last week. And that said that 72% of people who find a podcast on YouTube go on to subscribe to it in a proper podcast app.
Well,
so actually YouTube is there being something, it's not necessarily a consumption platform for people who are enjoying podcasts. It's there as a discovery platform, and people then go, oh, this is pretty good. I'll get this in my podcast app. So I think that's interesting. And I think the other sort of side that I wish would happen next year is that one of the reasons why video podcasts aren't necessarily as big as they could be, is that they end up being in different feeds and in different, there's new media show and then there's new media show video. And so you end up splitting your if there was an equivalent of Google Juice, you end up splitting that. And so therefore, if we were to rework that a little bit so that you had one feed out there that had your audio and your video in there, and the podcast app knew when to show you the video, knew when just to download the audio, then that may be a better solution, because it may then allow podcasters to have one feed rather than 2 or 3 or 4. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the amount of different feeds that Leo Laporte has, for example. He's got Twit normal, Twit low bit rate, Twit H265
HD,
video,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so on he goes. And you can't see that helps him very much in terms of the total charts and stuff like that. So I think something, the alternate enclosure tag would be helpful there. But I think just something that helps your podcast app know, he's turned the screen off. I'll stop downloading the video version of this and switch over to the audio version. Something like that might be useful. And the concern is that, of course, Spotify has already built that and has therefore built their own proprietary video podcasting platform. Thank you, Spotify. But it would be really nice if you would be a little bit more open. And, if you've thought of a standard here in terms of how video podcasting ought to work, then share it with the rest of us, and we'll probably stick that into all podcast apps, and everybody will be happy. But I'm sure that there'll be more video components in podcasts as we move forward. I'm fascinated to learn what Todd has already learned, so I hear, about how YouTube podcasting is going to work, and everything else. I think it's going to be an interesting time for next year.
Here's the thing about video consumption. It's different.
Yeah.
That's why it's an opportunity too, Todd.
Okay, so I watch most of my YouTube stuff on a big screen TV. I've got a smart TV.
Same thing with me. Yep.
I once in a while, recently I was changing out a alternator belt for my son, and a particular vehicle I couldn't figure out where the tensioner was. Couldn't get my head down in there far enough to, so I got the YouTube video out. Oh, there's where the tensioner is. So that type of thing is on my phone, standing next side the car, working on the car. But the other piece is way this audience is split and the way Geek News Central split is about the same. It's about 70-30 with Geek News Central, 80-20 with this, 20% watch the video. Well, why? Well, it depends on where, where they're listening. And they're not necessarily watching on their phone. They're on their computer in Chrome browser.
Yeah.
Watching it. And oftentimes, I'm sure they're at work and maybe they flip it back and forth. They're listening. Maybe they want to see what we're pointing out or something. They come back to it. So I think the consumption is different, and it's definitely an opportunity. We already know that I don't think there's ever going to be dual enclosures in feeds. I think that ship has already sailed. The alternate enclosure, again, adoption. Who's adopted it? And
well, nobody's doing it, so there isn't going to be any.
Well,
adoption.
there's some,
Right.
but the problem is
there are some.
But
Are there?
Yeah.
Okay.
The problem is, again, from my perspective, and Rob, you're going to face the same thing at Libsyn.
Right.
Is I'm accountable to my board for providing features and services to the 99%, not the 1%.
Yeah. Yeah.
It,
But
Right.
then if you were going to say that, then you'd never build anything new. So
No,
there's the balance. There's the balance there. I think let's broaden this out a little bit, because I think that here's an argument. Podcast hosts, you folks shouldn't just take somebody's audio and publish it on the internet. You should re-encode it to the best, most efficient codecs and produce different versions for different devices to save you bandwidth money and to give the best experience to the user. Is that a good idea, or is that insanity?
Well, that's the model that Stitcher was built on.
Well, I'll tell
Yes,
you
it
this:
is.
the second you do that, you get crucified.
But it's not the way they're doing it now, right?
You get crucified. The
Right.
podcaster crucifies you for touching their
Why is
audio.
that?
Well, Todd,
Oh.
I don't know if that's so much the case anymore. I think the longer standing podcasters would. I don't know that the newer podcasters really even care or understand what's happening. And to kind of add to this a little bit on the video side too, I occasionally talk to companies and people out there that are trying to play around with the ideas around video. And one of the things I hear people talk about is, well, why can't we publish a link to a YouTube video in an RSS feed?
You can.
And push that out versus, because at the end of the day, this conversation really gets back to money, comes back to dollars and cents. It's more expensive to host a video file than it is an audio file.
Yeah.
So, and at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is get the video into podcast consumption platforms, right? And what's the easiest way to do that? Now, granted, some people think about, well, there is an open API that's available, or a way that you can extract the video file from YouTube and then push it into to an enclosure file, but that doesn't solve the player and bandwidth and storage issue. And so I think there's been a lot of people playing around with different things, different options here. But I don't know what you guys think about those.
Well, a lot of people that do video put the YouTube and video in their blog post.
Right. They can do that right now.
They
Sure.
can do that now, but people are probably not consuming it there. They're discovering it on YouTube and playing it on YouTube.
Right.
So I think the bigger opportunity on video is, if you're doing it on YouTube, you better be doggone sure that you're telling people that's watching on YouTube where the site is, where you can go get followers, like James said, follow, subscribe to the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Use it as a lead generator.
Yeah, I mean, I am automatically putting my show, putting the Podnews daily podcast that I do onto YouTube. It happens automatically with some scripts that I've written, and that it gets somewhere in the region of 15 plays on YouTube. Now that doesn't sound like an awful lot, but when you have a look at the amount of plays that I get in Podcast Addict, or the amount of plays that I get in Overcast, or some of the smaller podcast apps out there, it's much the same.
Yeah.
So if you think about it as just another player, and you can automate getting your show in there, then it seems to work quite nicely. I do like the idea perhaps of having in the alternate enclosure tag, perhaps having a link to the video on YouTube. Which would then enable a podcast app, if it was clever enough, to go, oh, this is also available on YouTube. I'll embed the standard YouTube player in there. That doesn't sound like the world's most complicated thing to end up doing, because the SDK for YouTube is relatively mature. So that might be an interesting easy way. But obviously podcast hosts probably aren't going to be. Well, I don't know. Are podcast hosts going to be keen in doing that? Because they'll end up saving themselves an awful lot of bandwidth, and people still need to run their RSS feeds. So perhaps this is a good thing for podcast hosts. I don't know. But
I look at my YouTube. I'm just looking at it right now. Last episode of my GNC 16, one before that 21, 60, 27, 30, 27. In the scheme of things, Yeah. But how many of those were watching live? Probably 10 or 15. They pop in for a little bit. But you go and look
also, how many of those are brand new to your show? They've been recommended your show from the YouTube algorithm, and then they go and subscribe for 3 years in a podcast app.
Right.
This is what we don't know, I suppose. Yeah. And I think from that point of view, then great. That'd be really good.
And having been done this for years, how many do I have? I've got. Oh, did we lose somebody? Audio just changed. Oh, that was weird.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe me muting my mic.
So I've got. There's probably over 6. Well, just with CES coverage alone, there's a couple thousand. But yeah, there's a lot of videos on here, and I still have. I got a sucky channel. I don't have. I think the biggest video I have is like 49,000 views or something like that. From a single video, but it wasn't a podcast. It was just a regular YouTube video.
Yeah.
But again, I agree. It doesn't matter where they listen, as long as they listen, and then they know how to get back to Moonbase Alpha and follow or subscribe to the show, or they just go look for it on an app. So I don't disagree that it's the number 2 search engine. So why wouldn't it be good?
Todd, and also I've noticed too, because I, like you, have been consuming quite a bit of videos on YouTube as well, and I've noticed that the ads now on YouTube are oftentimes longer than the content.
I pay to get rid of that stuff now. I pay the $17.
Yeah, me too.
I don't.
Yeah. I mean, but it's interesting that that's happening. I guess is what I'm saying is that platform is turned into
video is expensive to deliver. Doesn't matter who is delivering it.
Right, but those ads are. I mean, I've seen ads in there. Like Microsoft will run an AI ad or something like that, and that'll be like a 27-minute ad.
What?
Yeah. No, that's.
But you can skip it after 15 seconds or something.
Right. It does say go ahead. You can click skip if you want, but you have to watch like maybe 25 seconds or something of it before you can skip it. But yeah, I've been seeing that get longer and longer and longer, and people are trying to insert their webinars or their presentations or whatever before content that's relevant to that topic. So it's an interesting phenomenon around advertising on that. It's really, in most cases, it's pure content marketing is what it is. It's not really an ad.
The best $16 or $17 I spend a month for YouTube is getting rid of the ads.
I would agree, and also you get YouTube Music, which is such a superior music player to Spotify. It does so many clever things.
It's a good lead into that topic, though, James. of YouTube podcasting, if they do that, right? It would just be an audio only experience, right?
Or would it?
If they do that, I don't know if they're going to or not, but yeah. What do you think, Todd? Oh boy.
I know something. I had lunch with somebody.
No, we'll see what YouTube does. I'll just leave it at that. But
put Todd on the spot, James.
What do you know, Todd?
I don't know anything. I'm just saying it.
Know?
But I think let's go back to the core of where we started this conversation about video. Video for most podcaster is for interaction. And if they do some interaction, they do StreamYard, whatever they do to do their thing live. They put it on YouTube, they put it on LinkedIn, they put it on Twitter, Twitch, wherever they put it. It's purely to get some interaction, because the majority of podcasters will never get enough views on YouTube in order to monetize, because it's such a high barrier to entry to monetize on YouTube. You have a much better chance of monetizing on a podcast than you do on YouTube anytime. So it has to be a discovery vehicle for your show, and it's a great one. Don't get me wrong. I've been doing it for years. So, I think I've been live streaming. I live streamed on Blip.
Blip, yeah.
I had Blip, I think, or Ustream was the first platform I was streaming on.
Right.
So, this has been a long time thing for me to do live, and it was purely because of the interaction. And I think podcasts are starting to figure that out. But then again, it doesn't bode well for the podcaster that's hung up on editing, because once your video's out, it's out. There's really no fixing it if there's a mistake. So then people that aren't doing a live show then are going to edit their show. Then they're going to put it up on YouTube. So it goes that way. It'll work that way as well. But, that's the question. How many's going to do live, and then how many will post to YouTube? What's that ratio going to be?
Yeah, I do feel some pressure, Todd, in this area around more of people feeling like doing high quality productions, right? Sound design and audio depth and all this stuff, and that somehow conversational shows, not unlike this, are less than, right? And that it's perceived as not as high quality, right?
I think some people are starting to figure out that raw is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's where it gets into live, right? Live is part of that, right? Part of that mixture. But I don't know, James, do you see that too? I see this industry moving more and more towards fiction and in-depth storytelling and true crime and all this stuff, and it's kind of,
there can only be so many of those.
Much harder. Those are much harder to do live, aren't they? And
I
think certainly there's a portion of the industry which is moving towards podcasts as just IP. We come up with a good idea, we come up with a good story, we'll make it into a podcast to show that it could be successful if made into a movie. But the only reason they're making it into a podcast is to get investors interested in turning it into a movie, in the first place, which I'm not sure necessarily treats podcasting with the respect that it possibly ought to be treated by. But anyway, I think certainly once you start having a look at some of the beautifully rich podcasts, and they've always been around. Radiolab, for example, is a great example of a show which is
fantastic,
so carefully put together. I remember the BBC wanted to buy Radiolab and air Radiolab, but they said, our broadcast clocks, you need to make it 2 minutes shorter. 2 minutes shorter. And the folks at Radiolab, I talked to Robert Krolwich about this, a while back. And he basically said, we can't make it 2 minutes shorter because we'd have to remake the entire thing. And it's just so much hard work. So we told the BBC to get stuffed, which I thought was, the brave thing to do. But yeah, so I think all of those beautifully curated shows don't necessarily work on YouTube, whereas a show like this works fantastically on YouTube. I think this is a great thing that YouTube is there for. So I think it works for certain shows.
I think so too,
but not necessarily for others. Yeah.
And if you don't have a video component, are people really listening to a screensaver? They're listening. They're not really watching. I've seen,
Daniel J. Lewis calls it fake video and says that the YouTube algorithm will harm you and blah blah blah. I'm not so sure that it's worthwhile getting angry about, but I think and weirdly I keep on being recommended the Podnews podcast on YouTube, which is a very strange thing of seeing your stuff being recommended to you.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah, so it's clearly being recommended to some people, although judging by the numbers, not an awful lot. But yeah, but it's just another tool, and I'm interested to see what YouTube do in terms of podcasting. It's very clear that Google podcasting, Google is a company with who just chase the flashing lights, and it's very clear that Google podcasting, whoever it is who came up with the idea, is long gone, and therefore it's another failed experiment from Google. It's a really big podcast app, but no one at Google seems to care about it. And the back end tools are a bit buggy and a bit broken, and it's a shame. And it would be lovely if Google were to spend a little bit more time and perhaps giving it to the Alphabet team to get into YouTube, maybe the right plan. But I would really hope, if there's one thing that Google has been pretty good at, it's been working on open platforms, working on open, tools to keep things, relatively open. They haven't always done that, but they've done that in a pretty good. Google has.
Okay.
Yeah. Not always, but most of the time they've been pretty good at sort of, setting open standards and everything else. And if they end up doing that a little bit in terms of the podcast world, then great. We could do with a little bit of help in that area. So if you I heard you, Todd, saying that YouTube, you would be able to get an RSS feed of your show on YouTube in the future, perhaps. I mean, they used to have RSS feeds in the dim and distant past.
I wouldn't hold your breath.
So it'd be interesting to see if they turn into a podcast host as well as just a podcast player. And podcasting would be just a drop in the ocean in terms of their bandwidth bill. So
it'd be nothing.
Yeah. So
around
maybe
the
that
air.
would be a plan.
The only justification they would have for doing that would be as if they wanted to get in the podcast advertising business.
Yeah.
But
they've already sold. They're now selling audio ads for YouTube Music, particularly in Canada, where they're trying a different model of YouTube Music. So if they're selling audio ads now, then they've got the capability to sell audio ads within podcast shows as well. So, and of course, they are one of the only large companies that have payment plans already set up across the world. You can be a YouTube creator anywhere in the world, and you will get paid, and they'll sort out the tax for you and everything else. There are very, very few companies who can do that. Spotify still can't, which is why we're not seeing Spotify paid subscription in more than 10 different countries. But Apple can, and Google can through YouTube or through the Google Play Store. So that's actually a real opportunity that they've got that, frankly, nobody else has. So, again, interesting to see.
Well, and also think about the core business models of all these companies too. Where their bread and butter is. Google is primarily an advertising company, right?
Yeah.
So if there was anybody in the medium that would benefit from getting involved in podcast advertising, it's Google, right? So it just seems like that they've really kind of let this one go by probably longer than I expected. I expected them to be involved in podcast advertising a long time ago, but I think they did acquire an audio company at one point, because I think they were trying to sell remnant audio ads for
they
radio.
did. They bought a radio company, a radio advertising company, and I remember at an NAB show. There was this whole, Google was there in force, and everybody was very excited. This was in Rome, in Italy. Google was there in force. Everybody was really excited. And typical Google, they lost interest in 6 months and moved on. Right. But I think that the idea was that they were going to sell remnant ads and those remnant ads, they would sell those on broadcast radio, because broadcast radio is still, $18 billion a year. So it's still a pretty big market. So they were going to do that, but also do some clever location-based advertising when you were listening on your phone and various other things. I can't remember the name of the company that they bought, but it was a full playout system that did all kinds of stuff, and Google ended up buying it and then lost interest and moved on. So so if YouTube's interest in podcasting helps the company as a whole get more interested in the whole podcast space, then I think that might be quite interesting.
Well, time will tell if that happens.
The other company that's been fascinating to see get involved in advertising, and it's a company that you wouldn't necessarily associate with this, is Amazon. They've had a very aggressive position on advertising in general here over the last 6 months that I've seen. And I believe it's one of the reasons why they wanted to acquire Art19 and Wondery, so they could really push on the ad business, because they have a huge division now at Amazon called Amazon Ads. I've seen a lot of marketing and promotion for that tools platform that they have.
It's astonishingly large.
Right.
Do you know how large it is? I mean, podcasting is $1 billion a year, right? Amazon advertising, $26 billion this year it'll make.
Right.
$26 billion. It's massive. Yeah. So,
but
if you contrast that with Google's much bigger than even that.
So the podcast ad revenue is so small. The only way you get $1 billion to $3 billion is you got to get the rest of the stack monetized. All of it.
Yeah. That's
all of it.
That's where programmatic comes in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's
Well,
interesting.
We're at 90 minutes. That just went fast.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
It's a very, very important question. Beards.
Oh.
I've got a beard. Todd seems to have kept his I'm only having it for November beard, which I think looks good. Rob, beard.
I used to have one, and I moved past that phase in life, so now I'm back to clean shaven experiences now.
I moved past that phase in life.
So I put up Rob front and center on the screen. You guys are still, you don't know he's being streamed directly now, but Rob will soon be joining me in the Bald Head Club, I would think, at some point in the near future. So
hey, I'm gonna fight that battle all the way down. It's gonna take me down, but yeah.
Well, I went through the stage where I was doing the comb over, and then I went through the stage where I had the spiky hair, and then COVID, because I couldn't go to the barber every 2 weeks. I said, forget it. I think
what we need is a photograph of. We've already seen your Harry Potter photograph from 2006 from your brilliant predictions article. So we've already seen you as Harry Potter, Rob. It would be great to see a picture of you with the beard.
Right.
If you can find one of those.
So,
actually, I think it's out there. I could definitely publish it in my Twitter account.
So I do have to ask, what enticed you to want to try to intimidate me? Such blasphemy.
What's this? Oh, impersonate you.
Yeah. How did
not intimidate you? I couldn't intimidate you.
Impersonate me. I'm sorry, I used the wrong word. That's my upper high school.
Oh, that's right, on the show a couple weeks ago, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was just fun to do. I did it earlier on. I think I got away with it. Yes, it's always good. But yes, it's every so often doing a little impersonation of Todd is always the. I went for lunch. I know things. I went for lunch.
Did you got to pick up the Toddisms though? That's the key. The Toddisms where I destroy this thing called English. So.
Right.
One thing's for sure. If I can do a podcast, anybody can do a podcast. It's just in the end, it's like, it might take you a little while, but.
Yeah. Practice makes perfect, right?
Says the man who's been podcasting longer than virtually anybody else on the planet.
Yeah, there's a few of us left. I don't know how many. How many are left, Rob? 5, 10 from the beginning.
Probably. Yeah.
Don and Drew.
I know it's probably a bigger number than that. It's probably maybe 10 or 15, probably.
Yeah. But
so James, when do you think we're going to see your bright shiny face on this side of the planet? Do you think?
So I'm hoping that Podcast Movement Evolutions in March.
Oh, okay.
I'm hoping that I'll be doing that. So far, I'm hoping to be at Podcast Movement Evolutions. I haven't booked the tickets yet, so you can tell how confident I am about the world in general.
Well, you can come to America. Your country might not let you out, though.
Yeah.
We
are. So we're just about to hit 90% in Queensland. So that means that I can leave the country and, more importantly, come back again. That's the important bit. So we should be okay there. So I'm hoping to do that. And then in May, there's a big radio conference that I'm hoping to go to in Sweden. The Radio Days Europe, followed by the podcast show, which is a big new podcast kind of half conference, half sort of festival in London. And that's towards the end of May, so I'm hoping to be there as well. They've asked me if I would do an episode of Podland on stage with Sam and I, which is my other podcast. So and that's filling me with complete dread, because that's not what I do. But if they've asked me to do that, then I might end up having to do that. So that might be fun. But those are the two things that I currently have, and I'm really hoping that in 2022 I can actually travel again and see people and see Todd in the bar and stand next to you, Rob, and feel small and do all of these things. So it'd be good.
I've asked that show in the UK what their registration numbers are, and they keep telling me we're estimated to have this many people.
Yeah,
well,
they've not started selling the tickets yet. They'll be selling the tickets in early February, I think.
So how can I, as a company, it's a big number to go over there and do that show. So we think about airfare, just everything. Getting it, shipping stuff in and shipping stuff out. So I want to. I hate to say it, but I want a guarantee. I want a minimum guarantee, because if I show up and they don't hit that number, then I'm expecting some refunds.
I think it's going to be very difficult for anybody on doing any event to be able to give guarantees in that way currently.
Yeah, I think so
but
too.
I mean, what I the podcast show in London is, I think, quite interesting in that the people who are running it have an awful lot of really good experience in running those sorts of large shows. They've done a bunch of really big, large events in the past. And the way that this is going to work is there's going to be a week's worth of shows that you can go and watch being recorded. They've got quite a few different venues. Some of them are pubs, some of them are theatres across North London. So that's going to be over a week, and then they've got a 2-day business conference as well, coinciding with that. And they've got some pretty big names who I know, because I'm helping them with some of the names, who are already speaking. So it'll be good to see. They've certainly got. If anybody is going to pull it off, it's the people who are working on that show. And I think certainly, looking at the European podcast market, there's a real opportunity, I think, in companies focusing on that market. It's growing very, very rapidly at the moment, and I think companies coming over and showing their face and saying, hey, this is us, this is what we do, I think would be a real opportunity. So but it'll be interesting. It's obviously going to be a first time for them, and the first time really that Europe has had a very large a podcast conference in this way. They've had Podcast Day, which has been quite successful for them, but that's very much focused on content, not focused on all of the other things that podcasting is focused on, and very much, public radio focused and everything else. So the podcast show being much more open around the business side, around a lot more of that kind of stuff is, I think, going to be really interesting. And it's the first for everybody. So
Yeah, but the way, to be honest with you, if it's going to be a bunch of podcasters, current podcasters, there's no opportunity there for a company like mine, because podcasters don't move. They don't move from host to host. It's they do, but in small numbers. So it's, the events to go to are the ones where you capture that audience. Brand new. Yeah. Brand new.
Yeah.
So if there's, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, certainly a festival that surrounds this can create an atmosphere of fans, right, that could turn into becoming podcasters. So that's the big rub. I know that they've made claims of trying to get out 6,000 people, which would basically be double or more the size of podcast movement in the U.S. So, but it's also, it's an unknown right now. I don't think any of us know, because there hasn't been any really great examples of any big shows that have come back to the same levels that they used to be.
We'll find out how CES is here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
Right.
Well, CES is going to be really interesting to watch. And I mean, I think certainly, with the stuff going on in the UK at the moment, particularly in terms of the Omicron stuff and everything else, it's going to be interesting to see what that does to the confidence there. But this show, I mean, it's been, it was supposed to have happened a couple of years ago, and they've kicked it down the road twice. I think that May is going to be a pretty good time for them, and they've got a lot of big partners, who are involved in it. Our friends at Spotify, our friends at Amazon, and a bunch of other people in there as well. So I think it would be worthwhile. And in any case, it'd be good to see you both outside of the US, and for me to not feel as if I'm the foreigner, and to have that on the other foot.
Well, I'm holding my breath that CES doesn't get canceled. They're at a very close window where if they're going to do it, they have to do it, because really people are starting to ship stuff already.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the NAB show, that was canceled within a week, wasn't it?
It's 2 weeks out. So
was it 2 weeks out?
Yeah, it was 2 weeks. So we're now
it was IBC that was canceled within a week in Amsterdam.
14 days right now from the actual show start. But your move-in starts on 2 January. So
yeah, of course.
Really, we're 10 days out. So I don't think they can cancel at this point. I think they're too close. Because when people start shipping tens of thousands of dollars worth of stuff and have semis heading towards Vegas, which they do, and flying airplanes from China, we'll see.
Yeah.
Oh, and one little complicational point here is that it looks like the podcast show in London is going on May 25th to the 26th, and it looks like
and then there's Podfest, isn't there? Yeah,
is going on the same days.
Yeah, Podfest is a couple of days later, and so you can just about go to one bit of the podcast show and then go over to Florida. Yeah. So if Podfest is better for it's better for you guys, then obviously you're probably going to end up doing that. But,
or we do two and send 2 teams. So
so Podfest runs from May 26th.
Send Mackenzie to Florida. That's the plan.
To May 29th. So it starts on the 26th.
So Rob, have you guys made a decision? Are you guys going to exhibit?
Oh, at the London show?
Yeah.
No, we haven't made a decision. No.
Well, I know that your CEO owns a house in London, so so that's a nice cheap way of getting in. So that might be a plan.
Yeah. He's actually over there this week. So yeah.
All right. All right. We're long. This is turning into another Adam Curry episode here. So,
oh well.
James, everyone knows where you're at, but go ahead and tell them anyway.
Oh, so yes, podnews.net, very good newsletter, comes out every day. It's all about podcasting. If you like this show, you'll like Podnews. Please go and subscribe. It's free.
All right. I'm Todd at blueberry.com, at Geek News on Twitter.
And I'm at Rob G at Libsyn.com, email, and on Twitter as well, at Rob Greenlee. So send us an email. We'd love to hear from you.
We'll be back for another show next week, right before the New Year. So everyone have a Merry Christmas and or Happy Holidays, whichever way you look at it. And but James, thanks for coming on. It's so early. What time do you have to wake up this morning? 5:30 to be ready to go this morning.
5:30, but it was all good, and it's always a great pleasure to be on this show.
I'm surprised you don't have like
long-time fan.
I'm surprised you haven't been inhaling coffee while we're doing this.
Yeah, well, that is going to be my next plan, inhaling coffee. Right. And also, I'm delighted that we're having house renovations done, and my last few days have been waking up to hammering. The tradespeople here, plasterers and carpenters and everybody else, start at 6:30 in the morning. And so that's not a great way to wake up. So thankfully, we've avoided all of the hammering and everything else.
Most of that is outlaw in the United States. They can't start before 8, and they can't run.
No, it starts at 6:30 in the morning, and the reason why is that they finish at 3:00 in the afternoon, because after that point it's too damn hot.
Oh.
So they end up going because it just gets too ridiculously hot. I think it's going to go up to about 92 today.
Beautiful.
Wow. So yeah, it's going to be another nice warm day. Wow. So
I'll trade
I'm looking forward to a coffee now, though.
All right, everybody. Thanks. We'll see you next time here. Thanks, James.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye. To everybody.
This is where it all goes very quiet.
Yeah. Yes.
We're still being streamed in some places.
It starts coming down. Yeah, right.
5 buttons.